Most women say they want a good man, but the moment they actually meet one, something inside them shuts down. Not because he's boring, not because he did something wrong, but because his presence doesn't feel familiar. If you've ever been walked away from after showing consistency, clarity, and respect, this isn't coincidence. It's conditioning. Somewhere along the way, many women learn to associate love with tension, chaos, and emotional unpredictability. So when stability shows up, their nervous system doesn't register safety. It registers danger. And that's the part no one ever explains to you. Because if you don't understand what's really happening beneath the surface, you'll keep questioning your worth instead of questioning the pattern. In this video, I'm going to break down the truth women were never taught about good men, and why doing everything right can still make you feel rejected. Most women were never taught what a good man actually looks like. Not in theory, not in slogans, and definitely not in real life. That sentence alone makes people uncomfortable because it sounds like blame. But listen carefully. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about telling the truth without softening it so much that it becomes useless. No one is born knowing how to recognize emotional safety. No one arrives in adulthood with a built-in radar for consistency, integrity, and grounded masculinity. Those things are learned, observed, absorbed over time. And for many women, that blueprint was missing. They didn't grow up watching a man who was calm under pressure. They didn't see a man who kept his word even when it cost him something. They weren't shown what love looks like when it's stable, boring in the best way, and free of emotional volatility. Instead, they learned from absence, or chaos, or inconsistency dressed up as passion. So when a man shows up steady, self-directed, emotionally regulated, something doesn't click. Not because he's lacking, but because he doesn't match anything stored in her internal reference system. And this is where men get confused, because you were told that being kind, reliable, and respectful was the goal. You were told that showing up with clarity and intention would be rewarded. What no one told you is this: recognition depends on familiarity, and familiarity depends on exposure. You can't recognize what you've never seen. This is also where the distinction matters. A nice guy is not the same thing as a good man. A nice guy seeks approval. He adapts himself to be liked. A good man is different. He has principles. He is consistent whether or not he is being praised. He doesn't bend his values to keep someone comfortable. That kind of man feels solid, predictable, grounded. And to someone who grew up without emotional safety, predictability doesn't feel comforting. It feels suspicious. This doesn't mean women consciously reject good men. Most of the time, they don't even know what they're reacting to. All they know is that something feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar often registers as wrong. Notice what I'm not doing here. I'm not excusing destructive behavior, and I'm not attacking women either. Two things can be true at the same time. A woman can be shaped by her environment and still be responsible for her choices. Understanding the origin of a pattern does not mean you are obligated to tolerate its consequences. This matters for you because it changes the story you tell yourself. If a woman pulls away from you when you show up grounded and consistent, it doesn't automatically mean you failed. Sometimes it simply means you don't fit a blueprint she was never given. And that realization is the foundation for everything that comes next. When the family doesn't teach you what to look for, society steps in and fills the gap. Not carefully, not responsibly, loudly, repetitively, and with very specific incentives. For many women, their education about men didn't come from a grounded father figure or a healthy relationship they could observe up close. It came from screens, movies, music, social media, stories designed to entertain, provoke, and stimulate emotion, not to teach discernment. And what does culture reward? Men who are intense, unpredictable, dominant in a way that borders on reckless. Men who create emotional highs and lows. Men whose value is measured by attention, status, or raw force of personality. Over time, those images start to blur into a definition, not a conscious one, but a felt one. Attraction becomes associated with adrenaline. Desire becomes linked to instability. Emotional spikes get mistaken for chemistry, and calm starts to feel empty by comparison. This isn't about women liking bad men. That framing is lazy and inaccurate. What's really happening is conditioning. The nervous system learns what love feels like based on repetition, and repetition doesn't care whether something is healthy. It only cares whether it's familiar. When chaos is familiar, calm feels strange. When inconsistency is normal, consistency feels boring. When emotional volatility has always been present, stability doesn't register as exciting. It registers as flat, or worse, suspicious. This is why a good man can walk into a woman's life and fail to create the spark she swears she's looking for. Not because he lacks depth, but because he doesn't trigger the same chemical responses her body associates with desire. Dopamine thrives on novelty and unpredictability. Cortisol spikes in unstable dynamics. Those chemicals can feel intoxicating when they're familiar. Safety, on the other hand, doesn't flood the system. It regulates it. And regulation feels underwhelming to someone who has learned to equate intensity with meaning. Imagine two men. One is inconsistent. He disappears, then returns. He keeps her guessing. Every interaction feels charged because nothing is certain. Her body stays alert, engaged, on edge. The other is clear. He shows up when he says he will. He communicates directly. There are no emotional swings to manage, no tension to resolve. Logically, the second man is the better choice. Emotionally, the first one feels more alive. And this is where the trap forms. The reaction isn't about preference, it's about familiarity. The body reaches for what it knows how to process, even when the mind wants something different. Understanding this matters because it reframes rejection. When a woman says she wants peace but keeps responding to chaos, she's not lying. She's conflicted. Her conscious desires and her conditioned responses are misaligned. Until that gap is addressed, she will keep choosing what feels familiar over what feels right. And no amount of you proving your worth can override that conditioning. That's not pessimism. That's psychology. This is where things shift from confusing to confronting. Because when a woman encounters a genuinely good man, her reaction is often not warmth, it's not relief, and it's definitely not gratitude. It's tension. On a nervous system level, something unexpected happens. Instead of leaning in, she hesitates. Instead of curiosity, there's discomfort. And without realizing it, her body enters a quiet version of fight or flight. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're unfamiliar. A good man doesn't play emotional games. He doesn't withhold affection to gain leverage. He doesn't create uncertainty just to feel wanted. His presence is steady. His intentions are clear. His emotional state doesn't swing wildly from hot to cold. And for someone raised around emotional instability, that steadiness doesn't feel safe. It feels exposed. Chaos gives structure to those who grew up inside it. There are rules to dysfunction. You learn when to brace, when to please, when to disappear. But calm removes those signals. Calm doesn't tell you what to do. It forces you to be present. And presence is terrifying when you've learned to survive by staying alert. This is why kindness can be misread as weakness. Why consistency can feel suffocating. Why emotional availability can register as pressure instead of intimacy. A good man doesn't fit the narrative she's been living inside. He doesn't trigger the familiar emotional highs and lows. There's no chase, no unpredictability, no spike that makes her feel temporarily alive. Instead, there's quiet, space, a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable when they're not ready to look. So the sequence unfolds almost automatically. First comes confusion. She can't explain why she feels off. only that something feels different. Then comes withdrawal. She pulls back slightly. Messages slow down. Energy shifts. Finally comes rejection. Sometimes politely, sometimes abruptly, but almost always without a clear explanation that makes sense to you. From the outside, it looks irrational. You showed up. You were respectful. You didn't overextend or underperform. And yet, you're the one left wondering what went wrong. Here's the truth most men never hear. When safety hasn't been part of someone's emotional upbringing, safety feels dangerous. Not consciously, instinctively. Because safety threatens the identity built around survival. It disrupts the internal logic that says love must hurt, must be earned, must be unstable to be real. A good man challenges that logic simply by existing. And when a belief system is challenged, the nervous system reacts before the mind can catch up. So she doesn't reject you because you lack something. She rejects you because you represent something she hasn't learned how to receive. This isn't an invitation for you to perform differently. It's not a call to become colder or more distant to be chosen. It's an explanation for why doing everything right can still lead to being pushed away. Understanding this protects you from internalizing rejection that was never about your worth. And it sets the stage for the deeper pattern underneath all of this, the one that keeps people bonded to pain even when peace is available. This is the part most people avoid talking about because it forces honesty instead of blame. Trauma bonding isn't about drama. It's about familiarity. It's what happens when pain becomes the emotional language someone learned to associate with connection. Over time, the nervous system stops asking, "Is this healthy?" and starts asking, "Does this feel like home?" For many women, love wasn't modeled as safety. It was modeled as tension, as walking on eggshells, as having to earn affection by enduring discomfort. So the body learned a dangerous equation early on. Pain equals connection. Anxiety equals attachment. Emotional intensity equals meaning. That's how you end up with beliefs that don't make sense from the outside but feel real on the inside. Jealousy becomes proof of care. Control gets reframed as protection. Emotional volatility gets mistaken for passion. And calm, genuine interest feels empty because it doesn't activate the same internal alarms. This is why some women feel more bonded to men who hurt them than to men who treat them well. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering is familiar. It gives their nervous system something to organize around. When a relationship is stable, there's nothing to fix, nothing to earn, nothing to survive. And without that struggle, a quiet voice surfaces, one that says, "I don't deserve this," or worse, "This won't last." That voice is the beginning of self-sabotage. When things start going well, she pulls away. She questions your intentions. She creates distance where none is needed. Sometimes she picks fights. Sometimes she shuts down. Sometimes she disappears entirely. Not because you did something wrong, but because the absence of pain feels unsafe. There's a hidden belief underneath all of this, one that rarely gets spoken out loud. Good men don't stay with women like me. That belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If she expects abandonment, she unconsciously accelerates it. If she believes stability won't last, she tests it until it breaks. And when the relationship ends, the belief feels confirmed, even if her own behavior played a role. From your perspective, it's exhausting. You're offering consistency and being met with suspicion. You're extending emotional availability and being treated as if there's a catch. The more grounded you are, the more uneasy she becomes. This is where men get stuck. Because you can see the pattern. You sense the fear underneath her behavior. And part of you wants to stay, to prove that this time is different, that you won't leave, that your presence is safe. But understanding trauma does not obligate you to absorb its consequences. This isn't about hating women. It's about seeing reality clearly. A woman can be wounded and still responsible. Her past can explain her behavior without excusing the damage it causes in the present. And the most important thing to understand is this. Trauma bonding doesn't heal through reassurance. It heals through self-awareness and personal work. Until someone is willing to confront the beliefs that keep them bonded to pain, they will continue to mistake chaos for love and peace for emptiness, no matter how good the man in front of them is. This is where the focus has to shift to you. Because men who are grounded, conscientious, and emotionally capable tend to fall into a specific trap. Not because they're weak, but because they're wired to take responsibility. When you see someone struggling, part of you wants to step in. When you recognize trauma, you feel the urge to stabilize it. When you sense fear beneath her behavior, you want to prove that you're different. This is where the savior instinct shows up. It sounds noble on the surface. Patience, understanding, emotional availability. You tell yourself that if you stay consistent long enough, she'll finally feel safe. That if you absorb a little more chaos, things will eventually settle. But this is the moment where good men slowly disappear inside their own relationships. Trying to fix someone requires emotional labor, constant calibration, walking on invisible lines, monitoring her moods, adjusting your behavior to prevent triggers you didn't create. Over time, your energy stops going toward your purpose and starts getting rerouted into damage control. And that's the cost most men underestimate. You lose time, you lose focus, you lose momentum. The things that once defined you take a back seat to managing a dynamic that never stabilizes. And the more you give, the more is expected. Because when someone hasn't learned to regulate themselves, they outsource that regulation to whoever is closest. This is where the difference between an asset and a liability becomes clear. The right woman adds clarity. She supports your direction. Her presence amplifies your life instead of consuming it. Being with her feels like forward motion. The wrong one pulls you into loops, conversations that never resolve, patterns that repeat with different explanations. You're always almost there, but never actually at peace. And here's the truth most men resist. Loving someone does not require self-erasure. You are not meant to sacrifice your identity to prove your commitment. You are not meant to become smaller so someone else can feel bigger. And you are not responsible for repairing wounds you didn't create. Empathy without boundaries turns into self-betrayal. This doesn't mean you abandon people at the first sign of imperfection. It means you recognize when a relationship requires you to abandon yourself to keep it alive. A good man leads his life. He does not orbit someone else's chaos. If being with her consistently drains your energy, blurs your direction, and demands that you suppress your values, that is not love being tested. That is your life being negotiated away in pieces. And no amount of patience can turn that into something healthy. At some point, responsibility has to be placed where it belongs. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but with clarity. A relationship only works when both people are willing to look at themselves honestly. When both are capable of saying, "This pattern is mine to address," instead of outsourcing their growth to the person standing in front of them. No amount of patience can compensate for a lack of self-awareness. You cannot build something solid with someone who refuses to examine the beliefs driving their behavior. You cannot stabilize a dynamic where only one person is doing the emotional work. And you cannot carry a relationship on your back without slowly bending under its weight. This is where the power shift has to happen. A good man does not reparent adults. He does not reprogram someone's nervous system through sacrifice. And he does not rescue people from patterns they are unwilling to confront themselves. That doesn't make him cold. It makes him responsible. Because responsibility also means protecting the life you are building. It means honoring your direction, your standards, and the values you've earned through experience. It means understanding that love is not proven by endurance alone. Real partnership requires two people moving toward growth, not one person dragging the other forward. When you stop negotiating your core values, something interesting happens. The dynamic changes. Either she rises to meet the standard, or she removes herself from the equation. Both outcomes restore alignment. This is the part many men miss. Holding your ground is not an ultimatum. It's a filter. You are not punishing anyone by refusing to abandon yourself. You are simply choosing to live in integrity. And integrity has a quiet authority to it. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It doesn't over-explain. It just stands. When you remain consistent in who you are, you stop auditioning. You stop proving. You stop chasing validation from someone who hasn't learned how to receive it. And in that space, you reclaim your power. Not over her, over your own life. Because the strength of a good man has never been about how much he can tolerate. It's about how clearly he can see, and how firmly he can choose not to betray himself in the process. That clarity is what separates growth from stagnation. And it's what prepares you for a connection that doesn't require you to disappear to survive it. Here's the truth. Most men never hear clearly enough. Not every woman is ready for a good man. And that reality says nothing about your value. Some people are drawn to peace. Others are still oriented toward patterns that keep them busy surviving instead of building. When a woman hasn't learned how to receive stability, consistency will feel foreign. When she hasn't confronted her own conditioning, a grounded man won't feel like relief. He'll feel like a disruption. And you are not required to shrink yourself to be less disruptive. A good man doesn't wait to be chosen. He chooses where he belongs. He doesn't audition for love by tolerating chaos. He doesn't negotiate his principles to stay connected to someone who hasn't done the work to meet him where he stands. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. When you remain anchored in who you are, something inevitable happens. The wrong dynamics fall apart. The wrong people drift away. And what's left is alignment or solitude. Both are preferable to losing yourself slowly in the name of connection. This is the quiet power most men underestimate. You don't need to convince the world you're worthy. You need to stop abandoning yourself for environments that can't sustain you. When you do that, life reorganizes. Some people rise, others exit. Either way, the noise clears and clarity returns. If this message resonated, don't treat it like entertainment. Treat it like a line in the sand. Subscribe, not for me, but as a commitment to staying conscious in a culture that profits from confusion. Like this video so it reaches the men who are questioning themselves instead of the patterns around them. Share it with someone who's been carrying too much for too long. And if you're willing, leave a comment with one sentence you're done compromising on. That sentence might change more than you think.